Good morning, hi. Welcome to Melbourne Recital Centre and welcome to Melbourne International Jazz Festival Congress. Woo, come on. All right, that's good. My name's Chelsea Wilson. I'm the Artistic Associate for MIJF Congress and really thrilled to be here with you today. Really excited about all of our panel conversations. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we are meeting upon today, the people of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge any First Nations people joining us today. I'd also like to acknowledge and say a huge thank you to some incredible people that have made this Congress come to life. Our principal partners, Creative Victoria and the Australia Council, the RISE Fund and Australian Government Initiative, the Helen McPherson Smith Trust and the US Consulate and the Vizard Foundation. So we're here this morning to chat about accessing international markets, which can kind of seem like a bit of a crazy topic given that travel hasn't been an option for so many of us over the last 2 years. However, even though travel has been difficult, there's still people all around the world who are very interested in hearing Australian music and are still consuming music. And the world is starting to open up in new ways again. So in this conversation, we're going to be talking about how we can access international markets, how we can reach audiences around the world, what the opportunities are, and we're going to speak to some incredible people that have had a lot of experience in different areas of the music industry and have tackled this kind of topic in a lot of different ways. So I'd like to introduce our panellists. To the left, we have Si Gould from Wondercore Island, Jeremy Furze from Applejack Music, Melanie Pose from the Victorian Music Development Office, and Dom Alessio from Sounds Australia. Can you please give them a round of applause? Thank you so much. I'd like to just quickly whip around the panel and just ask you all to describe some of the things that you do in 2 or 3 sentences.
Where are you starting?
That's the challenge. Si, can we start with you?
Sure, yeah. I manage Hiatus Kaiyote, and we try to turn their art into manageable day-to-day business and keep everything from going on fire.
Jeremy?
So I'm an artist manager as well. I manage the Teskey Brothers and Liz Stringer and Little Quirks from New South Wales. And I also own a venue, the Bridge Hotel in Castlemaine, and I'm on the board of Main FM, the community radio station there, and I'm a drummer.
Melanie?
I am currently working at the Victorian Music Development Office. We run programs to help support music businesses to achieve the best that they can. I'm also in the process, as part of that role, opening a new space for the music industry in Collingwood Yards called Music Market, which opens next week. I'm also on the board of Speak Percussion. That's what I'm doing right now.
And Melanie, you're the former program manager of Melbourne International Jazz Festival.
Yeah, former program director working with Michael at Jazz Festival, so it's lovely to be back.
And Dom Alessio joining us via Zoom from Sydney.
Hello. So I work for Sounds Australia, so we're the music export office. So we offer Australian artists and industry access to international music industry, and generally that takes place at international showcase conferences. So South by Southwest, Jazzahead, The Great Escape, places like that. And I came on board about 4 years ago to see how we could offer that within a digital space.
And I'm also an artist as well as working in festivals and also have a background in radio. But I guess one of my personal interests in this topic is that I performed at the Australian World Music Expo a few years ago at a showcase event, and through that event I was offered a spot at Glastonbury Festival, and that really got my interest in how showcasing works and what those kind of opportunities are. And I travelled to Jazzahead a few years ago and also New York Jazz Congress to kind of check out how they're doing it over there. So hopefully there's some other kind of insights as well that we can share. But my first question that I wanted to ask all the panelists was around how do you choose what international markets you can try and break into? Because it's a huge world out there. So how do you determine which market is right for you and where you should invest your time?
I'll start. In my experience, there's been a few indicators of where there might be a bit of heat, and that's through streaming platforms, where people have just started organically listening to the artist, and that's obviously a newish tool, so it's a really good one, and it's becoming more important as time goes on, as there's more platforms. Obviously with TikTok, YouTube, some of the data available through those is really key to making some of those decisions. I think there's also one other thing that I really look for that I think has really given the strongest indication that it's worth going somewhere is that there's someone there who is a partner of some kind or a believer of some kind, a supporter, who we've made contact with, who in their eyes can see opportunities and commercial viability for the artists. It's not just us over here going, wouldn't it be nice to go to Canada? It's like someone over there going, we can see what you're doing and you should bring it over here. And that could be an agent, another manager, it could be another artist, it could be a record label, like just any believer really. And I think that sort of drew us initially with the Teskey Brothers. We met an agent who was in the States, and that's what drew us there first.
To go back to that point around Spotify, how do you think people in those different territories were finding it? Because there's so much material on Spotify. What do you think led them to the Teskey Brothers specifically on that platform?
It was fairly organic. There's a lot of sharing going on, I think they had luck with a few playlists early on. There was no radio play, so I couldn't point to any media outlet that had pushed the band's music to that audience. It was more just sharing. I mean, they had a pretty good social media presence, and they were pushing content out there and doing lots of things to make themselves relevant and accessible to people online. But at the end of the day, we saw it. It happened through a lot of sharing. The Australian expat community is often the first on the ball with Australian artists, and that's why London and San Diego and LA are often a good port of call first, because there's a lot of Australians who live there who still have close connection with Australia, and they still listen to Australian radio or talk to their family and friends, and they're more aware of what's going on here. So in the early days, I think that's probably something that connects you or gets things going without you stepping over on foreign soil. But it's often hard to tell what drives those numbers up. We had 10,000 Spotify listeners in New Zealand, and as far as I can tell, it was just word of mouth. And we saw that when let's book a show in Auckland and see what happens. And then we sold out 300 tickets in Auckland. It was like, okay, cool. That's our start. Now we can go back and build on that.
Yeah, great. Si, how do you choose what international markets you should try and break into?
Sure. Well, certainly like breaking into new markets with like the kind of data resources we have now is a lot different from when we was first starting with Hiatus, which is really like Spotify was just really rolling out in like 2011, 2012. I'm not even sure of its level of presence in Australia. I think it was maybe first or second year. So for us, we really just researched, and it's kind of like still the advice I give to a lot of young artists. I'm just like, who's doing what you're wanting to do, and they're like several years down the track. And I just like look at their imprint and where are they, who's playing them, what DJs, what promoters, what managers, what agents. And you can very quickly, just for a couple of late nights on LinkedIn, start to build a real profile of like, who are all your targets? And that's what we started to do. We just started targeting aggressively, like all those DJs, whether they're in Israel, Amsterdam, London, NTS people, KCRW, all of them. And we all service them with everything. And we slowly, built relationships via social media, email with all these people, and they believed in the band. And those early crop of believers became like, the people who were preaching it. And they were really, we went over there, we lost, money for years, but those people are still part of our relationships now. They're still believers in the band. And they didn't have anything other than belief, and it was really important because there was no necessary like financial gain for them, like those people were trading off cultural capital, like, Meg Stubbs, Megan Staple, like, Revive over in New York, and, Anthony Valadez at KCRW, or Giles, like these people, like their currency is being connected to the up and coming. And so they were the ones that we sort of quickly worked out, we need to connect with them. And they really helped us join the rest of the dots so we could make an initial sort of push. And that formula has kind of been replicated more or less in every other country. It's separated now. Like we deal with agents, we don't even know how they're necessarily making their decision making. Like, why do we have this kind of offer in, Japan versus this kind of offer in Mexico? Like, and the only other thing I can say is we did a real amazing audit of all of our data with a team called Dream Team from the UK. They're like ex Domino general manager and ex woman from Believe, and they kind of do a bit of a dive, and they could scrape all of our data and build this audience profile, and they could really show where there was room for growth and potential for growth, and all those different signs on it. And that's way beyond my pay grade. But all I can say is, like, initially, like I just looked for like what's already happening, like what scene would you connect into, and you sort of can begin to build a bit of a profile. And it's not that hard. I mean, if you look at Melbourne from someone from in New York, it's a microcosm Melbourne, but you could kind of work out if you're into like playing electronic and drum and bass, like within 10 minutes you're talking to Jerry Poon, like it's or in the Australian jazz space, like we're really talking about a small number of people who can really help you on the ground over here, and it's the same over there.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And if you kind of think about our community radio culture here in Melbourne, the sort of presenters that are on PBS and Triple R, they're people who aren't paid to present shows, but they're people who are incredibly passionate about the local scene and about music, and they become the real champions and supporters of bands internationally, and are the ones who are then calling festivals like MIJF and saying, you should book this artist, they're amazing. And so connecting also with your community here can help open up those connections, because often the broadcasters and people here know people in those other territories. And definitely that's something that I've utilised, is, meeting broadcasters on PBS. And in particular, I remember a guy from the UK who was doing some fill-in shows and turned out to be an ex-employee of Sony in London, and hooked me up with a publicist in London who ended up doing PR for my record, who then introduced me to a bunch of other people. And it is kind of a small world, really.
I was just going to add to that. I had an experience. I was in Paris in 2019, and through someone I know who's a musician, met this guy who's on, I think it's called Rinse France, Rinse FM, and the number of Australian artists that this DJ who plays on this, has a show on this radio station, knew, and the emerging artists that he knew, I was floored. Like Tiana Kazi 3 years ago, effectively, just starting out really to develop a name here. And he was tapped into the whole scene in Melbourne, in Brisbane, knew about Soul Has No Tempo. I was kind of, not floored, but it was really nourishing to sort of hear and be able to have those conversations. I ended up going on his radio show and kind of doing a bit of promo for the Melbourne scene and the Australian scene. But there are people out there in the world who are really looking at Australia and looking at Melbourne. Like, this guy knew the scene here really well. And there is an awareness. So I think, what I was sort of saying about reaching out to people who are connected and, who have an interest in the area that you're making music in, can be a really valuable way to develop an audience and a reputation in a place. So yeah, this guy plays on the radio, he plays out a lot, he's connected to a whole lot of people. That was a great network for me to sort of tap into, and someone that I could sort of help to champion some Australian musicians, through.
Dom, did you have anything you wanted to add to this question about choosing which international markets we should try and break into?
Look, I think everybody's covered it, which I guess shows that there isn't a magic bullet, right? Like there are so many different ways in which you can start to target different international markets and see what's popping off and where you want to pour fuel on the fire. Um, and I guess I'd just like to reiterate that really it's just really an investment in time at the start in order to start getting your music out to the world and seeing who picks it up, which is such a beautiful thing with the way that music is distributed now, and the way that we access music is that you can just start to target essentially the entire world and then start to see where your music is being picked up, as opposed to saying, I really love this particular country, wouldn't it be cool to tour there? And then going over and expending a lot of money for not much gain. And I guess I would just like to say one last thing, and it has been touched on, that regardless of the method of distribution, one thing that doesn't change is that people love to be the first to recommend music to their friends or other people, like regardless of how we listen to music now. So, Jeremy, I think, was the one who touched upon expat communities. Like, no doubt Australians love to tell their American friends about a great Australian act first, because they get the kudos of being able to say that they, told their friends first about that particular act.
If I gave you all $30,000 to invest in international markets, how would you spend it? Si, how are you going to spend 30 grand?
Get some developers to build a DAO so we could release an NFT as an album.
Missed that. Was that an apology?
I looked at that. I was thinking about that, and it unfortunately the answer is like, what's the artist and what's the kind of music? I've got two emerging artists that I'm like mentoring at the moment through releases. One, we're spending, it's not that much money. It's not 30G, but we're spending about 5G. And one, we're focusing on radio because he's actually got some, and we're focusing on UK radio because that's based on, it's in this sort of, it's a spiritual jazz kind of thing, which has some recognizable names that are playing on the record. And we're like, cool, let's work with these prominent radio DJs in the UK. And we're going to do just one press blast over in the US. So we're working, radio really aggressively all through the BBC, stations. Another artist I'm working with, no radio possibilities, but great story. So we're spending on a community manager who's going to be having a really aggressive campaign to just build his engagement and audiences across social with content. We're spending a lot of money on content, and then we're going to press for a couple of key feature sort of pieces, as well as kind of making sure that all of the previous supporters of these other projects are aware of it across the whole press gambit. Similar amount of money, two very different types of strategies. But if I had $30,000, I'd probably try to cover both of those bases. I would just be spending as much as I can to be developing the market. So whether that's community manager who's really focused on all of the different social platforms, and making sure we've got a really prominent publicist and press team, and someone who's really good at allocating advertising and marketing spending. So you have all your targeted ads, and I'd have someone who ideally is working radio on both sides of the Atlantic. And when we talk about overseas, we're talking about America and Europe and the UK for the most part here. We're not talking, we could spend $30,000 in India and just focus on, whatever the cafes around the cinemas. But I guess that's what I hear when I hear that. So all those boring traditional things, which hopefully will cultivate enough significant audience, ticket buying audiences and engage fans that will mean that you've got both agents, managers, promoters, and labels, smashing your inbox.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I think that's real key what Si said about it being different for every artist. It really depends what you're doing and where you fit in. I mean, I've done a lot of work with Dom and the Sounds Australia team at showcase events overseas with artists, and the South by Southwest, the Great Escape in the UK, and Reeperbahn in Germany, and I've found that it costs a lot of money to go over there with a band and put on a great show. So you'd eat up a lot of the 30 grand just doing one of those things. But I've found that the human connection you can make with the industry, finding that champion can be so valuable. I mean, Teskey example is, in Austin at South by Southwest, they were playing in a brewery to about 15 people, but one of them was this German fella from Berlin. He works at Universal Germany, and he was just in love with the band, fell in love even more. We hung out and had a meal with him and drank lots of beer, and then he went back to Berlin, sold this band to Universal Germany, and is the biggest champion of that band. And we signed with them, and then he's now got a Labrador named Teskey, and he keeps on calling me and coming up with new ideas. And like him alone being involved in the project is worth way more than 30 grand. And so it was just like, that's the connection we made from that trip. So yeah, I do believe, even though it's a scary COVID world out there, I do believe in being, there in person and performing in person and making a connection like that.
Melanie, $30,000 to support an artist breaking into an international market?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just add to that like the showcase opportunity there is probably something that's really critical. There were 15 people, but presumably those 15 were industry people. They were the right people to have in the room, or at least one was. So if it is a big expense to travel, abroad and take your band away, which isn't often available to a lot of people. If it is an opportunity, kind of make it an opportunity that will hopefully lead to something like that. I do think that, the online space is growing, and, at VMDO we had a delegation of music businesses from Victoria represented at South by Southwest this year, which went really well. We spent money on creating digital assets for those businesses, which we're still able to use now moving forward for, future showcases, and I think they're going to be really useful. And there was an opportunity for people to be able to connect in online. I mean, granted, it was middle of the night, so you had to be really dedicated. But, that's a registration to get into South by Southwest. If you got in through VMDO, we supported that, so there was no actual cost to the business. We also supported the creation of those assets for those businesses. So there wasn't much by way of a financial spend, and yet they were able to access this international market. So I think it's also about being creative and understanding the context in which you exist, which doesn't always require you to have that 30 grand. Like, you need to know about organisations or projects like the Victorian Music Development Office, and understand where there are avenues that can help support you. I've also been to a couple of jazz showcases. I went to the Jazz Festival in New York when Chelsea was there for Jazz Congress, and I've been to a couple of major festivals in Europe as well. Opportunities are slim. It is hard in jazz. I think it's perhaps a little bit different to some of the kind of commercial pop music opportunities, but they do exist, and there is a real interest, I think, in the Australian scene. So it's just about finding your space and being able to tap into that. And talking to people on, we're all here, an opportunity like today or moving forward, being able to talk to us about the kind of music that you create and what places and spaces are going to work for you, and where there are potential audiences. Very roundabout way of answering your question.
Thank you. Dom, do you want to talk to us about international showcases in particular and Jazzahead?
Yeah, I would like to say the first South by that I ever worked was the one that the Teskey Brothers showcased at, and I'll always remember the Teskeys showcased out the front of a venue on Rainy Street that we took over for a week. It got rebranded Australia House, and honestly, it's the only showcase I've seen where people would literally stop mid-stride walking past that house to turn and be like, "Who is this band playing?" And just had a crowd on the footpath. Like the Teskeys just stopped foot traffic. They were so good. So I just wanted to say that because Jeremy's here. Yeah, look, we've got a mantra at Sounds Australia, which is go before you show. And what we mean by that is that it's not always necessary to have your first entry into a showcase conference be performing. Like for something like South by, I mean, for any of them, there are thousands upon thousands of people there. And so really, we would advocate for you as the artist or your manager to go over first and just be there and not perform, but just meet people and just build those networks and get a lay of the land. Because then once you've developed those networks, then the next time you can go over and perform, and you'll have people that you can connect with prior and be like, hey, come down and check out our showcase. Because not everybody is going to have that luxury or the fortune of starting to build a name or starting to build a reputation in an international market before they, go and showcase. So something like Jazzahead in particular, where there aren't a lot of artists who are chosen to showcase, and the trade conference part of it is such a large part of Jazzahead, that's certainly the advice that we would give, is that go over first and just go and meet all the industry, hang out with the Australians, get them to introduce you to people, and don't worry about performing, don't worry about needing to bring people to your showcase. Just go there and make those networks. And I think what we've seen over the past 18 months with virtual events is, while they are great and they can be good for that initial connection, it's really hard to replicate just how important and how powerful meeting people in person is, which I guess is kind of, we're humans, right? Like we work best when we're with people, we're communal creatures. So certainly, part of that 30K, I would definitely say, put that into flights and accom and go to your showcase of choice and start to meet people.
Yeah, and showcases can be just a really brilliant way and a great opportunity in those kind of trade fairs and so on. A great opportunity, as everybody said, to meet a variety of people who work in the music industry in different roles, from festival programmers that might be there to watch bands, to labels, to publicists, to a range of people that are there. My advice would be, if you are planning to go to one of these events, to do your research before you go and try and book in some meetings with people, because in particular Jazzahead, it's a massive exhibition centre. If you can imagine Melbourne Exhibition Centre with thousands of people in there that are all people interested in jazz, it does feel really overwhelming. And as an Australian going there, and I haven't spent a lot of time in Germany, they're all, there's not a lot of familiar faces, and it feels like everybody knows each other already. So how do you actually even start having conversations? And that can be quite overwhelming. So that's where you can utilise Sounds Australia, and you can talk to Dom or Glenn and ask, for help in connecting you with particular people to have meetings with, and make sure you've got a few of those penciled in, so you don't kind of go there and then realise everyone's already booked for meetings and you're sort of wandering around aimlessly because, you're not maximising the opportunity.
I was also going to say, I think strategy is really important. I did a bit of independent consulting before I was at VMDO and worked with an artist who was going to Womex, not an Australian, but someone from this part of the world who had a bit of funding to go to Womex and promote themselves. And we worked together on a strategy of, like, what were you going to do when you got there? What were you going to do in advance? What were you going to take with you? How were you going to make something of this opportunity? That artist, as it turned out, was moving to London anyway, but those connections that they were able to make through that Womex opportunity led to them getting gigs in London and then in Europe. That has meant that they've been able to sustain themselves with now a career living in the UK for the last, 4 years through COVID as well. So I think being prepared and not kind of just going and thinking, all right, I'll wing it while I'm there and I'll just make it work. Actually putting that effort in advance and really, preparing yourself and your assets and what it is that you're there to present, and making those meetings in advance is critical. Otherwise, you're very unlikely to walk away with much of an outcome.
And Mel, thinking about your festival experience, and you've done a lot of work connecting with international presenters to bring artists here for festivals here, but also visiting festivals abroad. What do you think festival directors and programmers are looking for?
I think sort of it's been touched on a little bit already around audience. I think is really important. You want to know that that there's an audience for this band that you're going to bring from Australia to, I don't know, Japan, Singapore, just to name a couple of the places that we worked with while I was at MIJF. Bringing a band over to play to an empty room is pointless. The presenter wants to know that there's going to be an appetite for that music. So again, it's like making sure that the people that you're talking and connecting to, I think Si mentioned it earlier, that there is people in that market who are successful in the genre of jazz that you're working in. You want to try and tap into that network and community and know that if you're connecting to a director or a program manager of a festival, that they already have an understanding of the kind of music that you're presenting, or that that you play, that you are able to bring to their audience, that there's going to be a synergy with what you do and what the audience expectation is. So I think that's something that's really important sort of in your research to really be thinking about. It is like as a programmer, you do get a lot of things coming in a lot of the time, and it is a really hard job to try and work out what is and what isn't going to work. And you don't have places to be able to support everyone as much as you might like to. So, and I know as an artist it can be really demoralising when you get rejections. Unfortunately, it does happen, but I would say the more research you can do and the more kind of strategy you can create around your plans to try and break into another market, I think is going to set you on a better path for success, and hopefully mean that you're less likely to get a rejection. And all of these things that we've been talking about will feed into your ability to kind of get that cut through and actually create that sort of connection in.
How much do you think a good live video helps?
Assets are key, and jazz community is probably, or jazz industry is probably less well known for that, I would say, than other.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Than other genres that we work with at VMDO and more broadly in the industry here. Definitely, I would be putting money behind great assets. To be able to, and live is awesome because people get to see exactly what it is that what you do when you get on a stage. And you don't, having an audience there responding as well is great, because they get to see the full package and what it would be when you're on stage somewhere else. So definitely, I mean, video, your press shots, really like making sure that the whole representation of who you are as an artist is reflected in the assets that you're creating is really critical, and I do think is something that we haven't. We used to get some pretty unusual press shots that would come through, when we were working on the Jazz Festival. And some of them I'd look at and think, how is this going to sell this show? This is an amazing band, but, 3 guys standing there in their Hawaiian shirts outside the pub, doesn't necessarily didn't at all reflect the music that they were playing, and doesn't really appeal to the audience here. So at the end of the day, I want to try and sell tickets to audiences and get this music out there, help presenters and promoters and programmers do that by giving them some great stuff to work with. I mean, Hiatus Kaiyote, Teskey's, you guys are working on that and creating amazing content all the time. There are reasons why, these things are working. It doesn't have to just exist within the genre that we're working in jazz, but...
Yeah, I'm loving that Mood Valiant imagery. That whole campaign is really...
Chelsea, actually, I just wanted to say something before about that $30,000. I realized I didn't spend it all. There was a little bit left over there. I find there's so many artists who still hear me at the moment just saying like, hey, can you help me with this video premiere or whatever? And there's this idea that like you just get it on one radio station or one blog and all that's just dead. There's just no silver bullet like, Jeremy was talking about as well. And back to Mel's point about content and quality of content, that's like really key. Obviously, these people spend so long on their chops, going to school, this decades of their life refining their craft. then they have to like package it and make it look really good and shiny. And like, maybe you can work that out. Maybe you can work out how to engineer the record yourself and master it yourself. And there's so many micro jobs here. You've only got so much money. But the one thing I find people falling down on the most is the marketing. Like they expect just like to throw it into the algorithm and it'll take care of itself. Like there's so many courses right now and tools. Like, I mean, Amber Horscroft, who's, originally from downtown over in New York, is now in Melbourne. And I think she's doing some stuff occasionally with the VMDO.
Yeah.
She runs the Deep Cuts workshop. I think for like, I don't know, a couple $100, you will essentially get like a pretty like thorough marketing, like a crash course in how to like go about releasing your singles, your strategy, how to read data, how to respond to it, and the step-by-step process. And it's like, there's like 200 steps around like releasing an album. And like, you need to know each one of those and the timelines and how to manage them. And I just keep pushing artists down that thing and they go, oh my God, there's an entire world. I've just been burning piles of money my whole life because I put so much into it and there's no follow through and there's no catching this process, which is really intense. And I just thought I'd add that, like, educate yourself in how to market, and you can do that. And at a certain point, someone will want to do it for you.
Yeah. On that, follow VMDO on our socials, because we are working on programs all the time to help support artists, musicians, music businesses to be able to do the best that they can with their product and their music. So VMDO supports people and businesses to go through programs like the one that Si's just talking about, that School of Deep Cuts program. You don't even necessarily have to pay for it. You just have to apply for the program and maybe you'll get in. There are structures that exist here to help support you. Don't feel like it's always that you have to have the 30 grand necessarily or have saved up the 5. Great if you can, but there's a structure here as well to try and help support artists and music businesses to succeed.
Yeah. I'd definitely like to echo the point around having the great promotional shots as well. It's really important. And if you kind of think of yourself as a consumer, a lot of us, when we go to the wine store, the ones with the gold stickers that want a medal might pop out. Or this is the bestseller book, and you go, oh, that's won the bestseller. Or, we're visual creatures and our eyes are attracted to things. So if it's a really dynamic picture, you're likely to look at it and it makes you feel curious. So I guess with your own representation of your music, you sort of need to take a sort of step away and think of yourself, have a little bit of a distance between yourself and go, does this picture, is it going to appeal? What does it say about my music? People flip through a festival brochure or they scroll through the website and they'll stop and pause on the pictures that look great. And that does sound really superficial, and it kind of is, but you've got to do the best justice and service to your music by creating the best visual representation that you can, if that's what it takes to get people to come to your show. And, it seems crazy to spend $10,000 on an instrument, but then wear a $25 shirt in a photo that someone takes on your iPhone and expect that you're going to sell 1,000 tickets. Like, that's just actually the reality of it. And, musicians are not models, and it's really uncomfortable at times to take photos, but it is sort of part of the job as being an artist and being an entertainer. People don't turn their back to us when we're performing on stage. They're actually looking at us. So kind of 50% of the show is visual.
And just thinking about like the 3 people sitting here in terms of the artists that they represent, you think about Hiatus, think about Women of Soul, and think about the Teskeys. I mean, that's a very different visual representation, very different music, but each have kind of put a lot of effort into and thought around what is that representation of the kind of music that we play and the individual artists that we are. Chelsea did an amazing job with that Women of Soul latest photo shoot and the creation of the visual story, which, feeds through to the show, which I saw on the weekend. The whole thing makes sense as a package. And, thinking about Nay as an incredible individual whose personality is, shown through the way that she presents herself, a very incredibly unique human. Obviously, we're not all going to be quite like that, but what an amazing representation of her as an artist in the, the way things are sort of created. So.
And Kamasi Washington is someone who springs to mind
Yeah.
as someone, who's crossed over, you know, who is playing spiritual jazz but playing at contemporary music festivals. And, you know, the first record's called The Epic, but his pictures are epic. Like, he just looks epic. And I remember seeing billboards of his album cover shot in Northcote going, I don't think I've ever seen a billboard for a jazz record, but it looks great.
That's interesting though, right? He's like a brain feeder artist, or like, you know, I remember before he was even really working with Flylo, like there was these like crappy little videos. He was playing at, what was it, the Blue Whale in LA? And I was just like, who the fuck is this guy? What the fuck? Yeah. And then like, you know, Brainfeeder worked with him, and we know the PR team that worked with him, and they've never worked at jazz artists. So they didn't work it like a jazz artist. Yeah. You know, and they didn't really necessarily, you know, pitch it in the same way. So they hit this different audience, and like, and they sort of pulled together like this amazing graphics team that really, like, you know, if he signed with Concord, I don't know if we'd necessarily have heard it. We might not, you know him in the same sort of way, you know, like it's a really, and then working with, you know, the XL Young Turks, you know, offshoot, like it's amazing, like seeing them contextualize all of this cultural stuff and all this aesthetic stuff that has existed, refined it and bring it into a contemporary lens. They're all amazing photographers and graphic designers and marketers in their own right. But there's a real lesson in that, like where they're kind of, I don't know, breaking away from the mold or breaking it somehow out of like, you know, a confined jazz way of marketing things, and it was definitely inspiring to see.
There is so much to think about for musicians who are putting out music and wanting to tour. So many artists are self-managed. So there is a lot to think about. There's a lot to do from a project management point of view. I think we've lost Dom. Hopefully we'll get him back. But I wanted to ask Jeremy and Si as well, from a management point of view, how can artists juggle focusing on their projects at home whilst also trying to break into international markets? Because that's a lot. How would you structure your time?
As a self-managed artist?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's really hard. I know I'm good friends with a few people who are doing that, and they just seem to be working like crazy, you know, because as a manager, you know, it's a full-time job. I'm there 9 to 5 in the office bashing away at it, but I'm not making music as well. So how do you've got to be able to divide the two sides of your brain to the creative, and then also put enough effort into the marketing, the admin, the organisation of the whole thing, the logistics, that doesn't let big cracks appear in either side. And you don't want to compromise your creative for all that, but you also don't want to drop the ball and not answer to emails for 2 weeks. So how do you balance it? You know, I think you just got to be, have like some sort of crazy work ethic and be really committed. But I think what's key is really just, you know, if you can get someone to help with any element of that, whether it be a friend helping for free or someone who's helping who you're paying, but maybe they're just, you know, they're a lower level, so you're not paying them too much within your budget. Anything you can farm out, I think, is really important to do it. Don't try and do everything. If you can see cracks appearing, that's a sign that, you know, you need to offload some things to people, and that's an investment. You know, every business has to invest in the initial stages to get places. There's no business in the world, no industry in the world where you don't have to invest upfront. Now, mostly it's time, but as your time gets thinner, you're going to have to like start paying some people to do things, or start really, you know, begging people to invest in you. But whatever it is, if you can see compromise happening on either side, I think that's a problem, and you need to sort of look at ways to fix it.
Si, how can you juggle your home, domestic audience and projects?
I mean, I think you're a sociopath if you're able to do that and be creative and have international audiences and be at home, or you're like just Tim Ferriss or something. But like, I honestly, like, I've got a bit more of a harsh, you know, belief on this sort of stuff. If you don't have managers and people wanting to help you out and collaborate and be part of your thing, and you're thinking about, you know, going overseas and stuff, you need to focus on being better. Like, you should really be focused on, like, I honestly believe, like, if you're really like, if your music is amazing, I really do believe that your press can be shit. I really do believe you can actually say no to all the press, and you can not take up, you can not compromise yourself. You just focus on making the most unbelievable art that is undeniable. If it's undeniable, people will rip it out of your hands. They will bang down your door to work with you. I do believe that. But if you want to, like, if you, people have to pay rent and like they want to just, it's, I see a lot of half-baked projects out there, and people just, they want to get it out there straight away. And so, yeah, you're going to kind of bumble along and make lots of mistakes, and yeah, work with who's in your community. I mean, I worked with Nay because she used to be a fire twaller, and I did spoken word poetry at a circus, hippie circus thing together. We used to go to Edinburgh Gardens and get drunk. That's why I manage her. I wasn't a manager, I just knew how to put on parties. And so sooner or later she put a band together with Bender, and I said, can I manage it? And they somehow let me. And it's all kind of, I've learned everything through that process. And, my, person who worked with me for years, I pushed her into managing 3070 at the start with them as well, And so there's people around you, who are useful, who can be, maybe it's your auntie or your cousin or your neighbor or whatever. There are folks who are out there, and every year, there's these little management schools that take however much money from kids and they kick them out into the industry with no outcomes for them. They're robbing these children of what they can actually have a career in the industry without hands-on knowledge. So they're being pushed out there with actually 4 years of schooling and no relationships. Go and find them and pull them into your apartment and show them their music, and find one that believes in what you do the same way that you do. So that's why I think collaboration is key. Just keep building collaborations across everything: musics, videos, mixing, marketing, all of it. The more you can collaborate and let go of and delegate, and the more you can be open to new ways of seeing and thinking about your music, I think the more chance you have of flourishing.
And it's a great point. Everybody's got rent to pay. I mean, this is a business. At the end of the day, you have to survive. And maybe international is not the right thing for everybody at, this particular time in their career. I think it's about also looking at and surveying the scene. Regional touring. I know we're not here to talk about that, but why are you looking at New York when you could be looking at Castlemaine or Geelong? Exactly. And are you likely to actually make some money if you go to Geelong for a gig and develop an audience there, and a network through Victoria potentially, rather than necessarily looking at America and going, that's where I want to be, or Europe, that's where I want to be. Yeah. You have to make some strategic decisions. You can't do it all. And you also, I think, have to think about it in terms of it's a career. You need to survive. You need to find ways to make it work for you. Yeah.
That investment thing there, Mel, I know Barney McCall, some of the most money he makes is in Bermagui. Yeah. They've got a beautiful space there, and I mean, for us, in Europe, we lost money, I think the first 5 tours, and then we broke even. Now we're making a bit of money, mostly in London, and losing across France and Germany still. Which America, I think, cost $3 million for John Butler to break.
Yeah, and no one would know that. I think that's what's really interesting. A lot of that's sort of trade secret, whereas the perception is that the band is huge and they're making, a mint. But it's incredibly difficult out there in terms of breaking the international market and then actually making money out of it. And we have music-loving audiences all over Victoria. Let's just think about in COVID times, if we can't go further, there's great opportunities that exist in our backyard. So think about those too.
So Si, just going back to your point around, that long-term investment, doing multiple tours before you start to break even, what are some of the things that you wish you knew when you first started?
Some of the things I wish I knew. To work with someone to move through all the different insurance policies. Look, to be honest, Jeremy, who's in the middle there, prior to really management, he was our guy. He ran our books, so he kind of stopped us from fucking ourselves. And pretty much, I probably wouldn't have a job if he wasn't there, because we had shows and stuff. And he'd be like, "Oh, great, cool, you got all these numbers," and he'd throw it in and he'd show you and he'd do these estimates. And we were throwing paint at a wall, but we could really look at what the bottom line's going to be. It's like, oh, great, we're going to make $250,000 in America. And then he'd come back with his calculator and go, cool, so you guys are going to have $100 at the end of it, you know, like once we've paid everything. So, yeah, I don't know about if I can speak to any like really big mistakes necessarily, at least publicly. But probably like, yeah, the touring, like I would say the one thing is like, on paper, like you can do 30 shows across 50 days, but you shouldn't. And if something will go wrong, something could go wrong, it will go wrong, you know, like there's always going to be a mistake. And so you got to leave like a little buffer there. So that's a routing thing. I know that like we had a show, you know, that was the last show between Las Vegas and Croatia. And our tour manager booked the wrong flight by a couple of hours to Croatia. So we had to drive from Germany in like, you know, it was like an 18-hour drive, you know, we had to make it in one day. We arrived 2 hours after sound check and had to go straight from that to Vegas to then Los Angeles to the Jay Leno show, straight back to Vegas. And that just impacted our mental health and our physical health. And we couldn't afford to not do the shows. So we were just stuck. There was no room for recovery. And that really probably did a lot of damage, you know, on like our well-being. And we probably spent way too much money on, you know, alcohol and therapists afterwards, you know, to make up for that, you know, trying to just fit it all in, thinking you can do everything. You really can't do everything. You shouldn't try.
Just on that, I mean, I think, you know, the way tours get routed, I've noticed at all levels from sort of bottom right up to upper echelons, there's always anchor dates, which are the ones where you get a sweet guarantee. The jazz festival that's, you know, government funded or whatever it is, you know, that will pay you a fair bit more than you can earn selling your own tickets in a club. So those are called the anchor dates, and you get them first, and they will pay for often everything else that happens around them. So if you've got 2 anchor dates across 2 weekends, don't then extend your trip, as Si was saying, to, you know, heaps more just because you're over there. Just keep it at a week, make the money there, play whatever you can in the middle, and then go home. And that's a really, really great strategy. Keep it short and focus it on, you know, a few cities, a few places, and make the most out of those ones without then just spending all the extra money on trying lots of different things and keeping on going. Just keeping it real short.
And there is support that you can access to help you get to these other shows. So if you do have a big opportunity like that, you might be able to apply for a fast track grant through local council, through state government, through Australia Council. And then there's also the EDMG export.
EMDG.
That's the one. I'm getting my acronyms mixed up. So that particular grant, you can apply to have up to 50% reimbursed for losses. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's through Austrade. And look, I think, you know, what Si was talking about before, I used to work at White Sky, which is a music bookkeeping accounting company, and that's where I learned a lot of things. And we used to do EMDG applications. We used to do cash flow forecasts and tour budgets. And I think if you're looking at going overseas, it's really important to chat to some people, whether it be White Sky, you know, or start with VMDO or Sound Australia, and get some advice on what funding's available and how you should manage kind of your money. There are people who can sort of help you out, do budgeting if that's not your strength. And it's so worth it because, yeah, you think you're going to make money and then you put it all in a spreadsheet and you realise you're not. And so it's okay to not be making money, but if you know in advance, that means you can apply for funding and be smart about it.
We're going to go to audience questions. If there's some questions in the room. Yes.
So just a quick one. Si earlier mentioned a group that does marketing, just briefly, a few $100 to help with videos and things like that, but I didn't catch the name.
Was it Deep Cuts, the program you were talking about?
Yeah.
School of Deep Cuts.
Amber Horsburgh. She doesn't do it for you. It's basically a training program that explains all of the ways in which you need the steps in order to release music through, based on her experience doing it in the States. So, am I right, Si? I don't know if you've done the program.
You're all across it. I mean, I love seeing artists get literate in that space, and managers as well. And I really believe, like, my hand on heart belief is, like, labels will not exist in, like, maybe 1 year, 10 years, whatever it's going to be. And I think it's going to be the model of, like, distributor and, working with the Ambers of the world, or the people that, that Amber educates, and these people who are overseeing a whole host of freelancers who are pluggers, community managers, strategists, advertisers, and they're kind of all the people who are working for a label in one building, even though they don't work in a building anymore. They all work at laptops and work freelance jobs, and you can oversee them and understand how all the different pieces work together according to a timeline and a budget, and, like, a visual marketing narrative. And, like, you can educate yourself on how do these pieces work together, how do we project manage it, and then run it out to all of your fans who are hopefully paying more than half a cent per stream.
Any other questions from the house? Si, we've had this conversation before, and I'd love to ask you about this again, and you sort of mentioned it. The word success has come up in the panel, and I wanted to, I guess, ask you about expectation management and any advice you might have on how we can measure our own success, with putting out records and being in the industry.
Look, it's I don't know, like, I'm pretty spiritual nowadays, to be honest. And, like, some of the lowest points of my life have been, like, outwardly what seems like success, So, like, success is totally it's really it's a personal thing, like the way that, like, you will measure that. And it's really important to recognize that, because you may be doing all the things that someone else thinks you need to do, whether that's your publicist, your manager, your artist, or whatever, but only you will know what it's doing. And you need to know what's important to yourself, and to work towards those goals, because otherwise you'll run out of steam. And one thing's for sure, none of us here are doing, like, what we do for the money. We're doing it for personal reasons that drive us. And it's not necessarily for a shiny triangle or, a certain number in your bank balance. None of those reasons. It's something else. And it's kind of tricky and ephemeral, and, like, it's really important reflecting on. So, for me, I know that, like, I'm drawn more and more nowadays towards the idea of community art. I'm interested in, things that have real meaning and that really uplift people's selfhood. So I really work with, like, 4 individuals who make music together. And if they're lit up like Christmas trees because they're so activated in their creative process and so engaged, and, like, they're seeing this stuff come together and come to life, that just makes me so it's what I want to live for. I really love seeing people have that. I've also done the opposite, where we're plugging away through, like, just meaningless meetings in advertising agencies, and, like, people are trying to tell us how to make music or look like this or whatever, and it's just makes your skin crawl. And it's like, we've been at the Grammys and just, like, hating it because it's just not us, like, we aren't like that. Those guys are not, they're not going to do dancing for anybody, like, they really believe in, like, making art that's going to transcend their sense of self and really explore the possibilities. So, what I look for in terms of success is, like, making sure that those goals for them are ticked. And that way I feel really, excited, and that feels like success, whereas making a lot of money may just be depressing as fuck.
Thank you so much, Si. I just think that's really important for us all to reflect on throughout the day, or whenever we're in these kind of industry-focused conversations, because the business side of things can feel so foreign and ugly to us as artists. And really it's about, how do we feel good about communicating our message? You've worked on this message, you've got this beautiful art, and all of what we're talking about is just different tools and different ways to get that out there. But really, we all need to really pause and reflect on what's really important to us, and how am I going to feel good at the end of the day, and not get in this sort of hamster wheel of comparison or feeling bad, because that's not going to help us on our journey to make art and contribute to the music community, which is why we're all in this in the first place. we are going to wrap it up there. Can you please put your hands together for our incredible panel, Alessio, Melanie Pose, Jeremy Furze and Si Gould.